Quite frankly, even if the election was stolen and the votes were fraudulent, but Congress was still certifying those votes, you would still be in breach of the law by storming the Capitol and doing what happened. So, regardless, yeah, it doesn't make it okay. Oh, I don't care. Well, I don't support the insurrection. I don't give a shit. I don't. Welcome back to Lawish. We are on part 3 of our series covering the topic of blind denial. For those who have watched our other episodes, you're already aware of this, but we broke this down into 3 different segments because it was such a big topic to talk about. And one, and quite frankly, we could have had even longer episodes on each topic, but we're trying to do it in a condensed, summarized way. But we also wanted to make sure we gave enough attention to each of these topics because they are very important. They all play their role in kind of making up what is coined blind denial. So we're going to be talking about the third one today. The first one we talked about was cognitive dissonance. We followed that up with dehumanization, and then today we'll be talking about administrative evil. So this will be wrapping up the 3-part series of blind denial.
Which, to remind people, it's just chapter 2 of the book that we're looking at, which is, we've said a couple times, but that is Blind Injustice by Professor Maud Gozzi. And we're breaking down the different chapters because they have all these biases that come into play majorly in the grand concept of wrongful incarcerations, right? So this is chapter 2, Blind Denial, which includes within it those 3 concepts that Jeff was talking about.
Yeah, and if you haven't already, if you are just now watching this episode, I do recommend going back and watching the other 2, because all 3 of these are related, and obviously they make up blind denial. They all play a role, and there is some overlap, and I think it would help, obviously, give you a much bigger kind of picture and outlook on what we're talking about today. But that said, do you want to kick us off, Jabron, with
let's
administrative evil?
Into administrative evil. Well, the concept of administrative evil is, the premise is that each one of us has a moral compass, right? And when you are on the street and you're on day to day and you're trying to decide what to do, if you're presented with a choice, and you have to decide, do I do A, do I do B? Normally, the moral compass would kick in and say, unless you're a sociopath, you would say, I'm going to do A because that is good, objectively speaking. But then the concept of administrative evil essentially says that once you become part of a larger group, right? So, for example, it could be a company. You're an employee of a company, or it could be a group of peers. You're a part of I don't know, this is the worst example, but a book club. Doesn't matter. The whole point is once you become part of a group, the instructions you're given by your supervisors, or technically the moral compass of this group supersedes your own moral compass. Where even if you are faced with decisions where you would have gone A, you go B if that is aligned with the compass of the group. And that is, and at the larger scale, what administrative evil is.
Yeah, it's like essentially an identity shift, because you're taking on a different role, right? And then you're no longer the individual. You're now part of a group.
You're now the employee or the member of XYZ group.
Yes.
So that is, I think, obviously these 3 concepts have been really interesting. But I think this one is one of the more interesting ones to me because it happens outside the self. So both cognitive dissonance and dehumanization is something that happens within you, right? But administrative evil is now yourself being a part of a group as opposed to the outside affecting the inside. As a matter of fact, in this case, in administrative evil, you're completely ignoring the inside. You're almost ignoring your moral compass, and you don't even look at it. You just follow whatever the group's dynamic is, whatever the direction of the group is. Yeah. So I think it's a really interesting concept.
It's like you almost blindly following, right?
Yeah.
Like you're just going along. This is how things are done. This is how it's, like not even questioning or thinking about, like, oh, should we be doing this or is this right?
It's the whole, we've always done it this way.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I'm not going to be the one that changes this. And then you go, and then the decision that you make is one that you normally wouldn't have made yourself, which to an extent also leads to some cognitive dissonance. If you think about it, sometimes you don't think about it, right? You just kind of do it. But then you think about it, like, wait, me, Jabron or Jeff, I wouldn't have done that. but because I'm part of a group that does that, I do it.
And that comes in with the dehumanization as well.
That's right.
It's the structure of the administration that allows you to dehumanize people, and for you to think that it's normal. Like it's got to take
very
off,
relevant
man.
to the context of what we're talking about, which is the justice system. Right?
Yeah.
When you're a judge, when you're a prosecutor,
Yeah.
right? So you fall victim, for lack of a better term, of the circumstances and the atmosphere and the office that you work for. You're like, well, this is the way we push, so we got to push that way, even if I normally wouldn't push for that.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen it when you're like the prosecutors you're going against. You know they wouldn't try the case, but because the office normally tries the case, we gotta try the case and waste the taxpayers' money. You know, even though nobody in their right mind thinking for themselves would want to try the case.
Exactly. And it's like, so the role technically should be to serve justice, right?
Right.
But it no longer is really that. It's no longer the role of the individual. I'm a prosecutor. I'm here to serve justice, whatever that is. Instead, it's, oh, this is my office. Here's what we do. This is what I'm doing because I'm part of the office. Yeah. And it's out of my control a lot of times, you know? Yeah. Which I don't know how many times we've heard now after the fact, again, the Holocaust, the Nazis and people who carried out this attack, I was just following orders or, you know, this, that, or whatever. And it's like, this is the same stuff that you hear from the prosecutors in this situation. Exactly. Not comparing prosecutors to Nazis, to clarify. I mean, there's a little overlap, but
absolutely not. Jeff's views do not reflect the views of the Lawish podcast.
Yeah. No, I do think that's funny. The irony or just the reality that there's so many people that you could probably pull 99% of the population today, and they would all be like, I would never have done that if I was, you know, in Germany. I would never have been part of the Nazi Germany. I would not have done that. They could never have done those horrible things, or whatever the situation is. We know statistically that's just not. You know, obviously, a lot of people would. Large portion would have.
And that's something I want to talk about when we talk about the experiment.
Yeah.
Because the experiment gave us actual figures, right? So statistics of the belief was precisely, you know, Americans are not going to do that.
Of course. Because we are
many people
higher morality,
exactly.
right?
We are on this high horse, and we wouldn't do that, right? It's got to be something to do with Germany and the way Germans are raised and whatnot. So we'll talk about that about the experiment, but that is really the point. Yeah. Like you said, is we would say if you poll everyone to be like, oh no, nobody would want to do that. But then when you're part of the system, when you see yourself as a cog in the wheels of a grander machine, you could be surprised, or you would be surprised how that could lead you to do something that normally you wouldn't do. Yeah. But then not only do it, you find a way to justify it, and that is kind of the whole concept.
In there, this is a side tangent, so I won't get too much into it. But I also don't want to again draw an analogy, but I do to an extent. For example, January 6th, the insurrection, right? I don't know how many people have heard that, you know, immediately people are like, they're idiots, they're criminals, they should all be arrested, this, that, or whatever, and it's like, or not even just the people who participated, but who had that mindset. But it's context, right? So when you are in people who were in Nazi Germany, Nazis who were following Hitler's, you know, orders and everything else, they genuinely believed a lot of the stuff they were being told, which was that the Jews were the enemies. They were trying to basically take over your country, this, that, or whatever. Much the same as the insurrection, these people were believing what Trump and other supporters that were pushing this narrative, that the election was stolen, right? So they were patriots in this role and part of this grander scheme of things, right?
In their mind, they were.
Yeah, they thought they were patriots, right? But so when you attack them in a way that's kind of the issue. It's like we both, depending on your viewpoint, and now obviously the election wasn't stolen, so there is a right and a wrong. Spoiler alert. But that aside, though, given what they were being told and what they believed, both sides were essentially playing the same role. The people fighting the insurrection and the January 6th committee and everybody else pushing back for democracy, and the people who thought they were fighting for democracy because they thought the election was stolen, which is inherently not democratic in nature, right? So it was a threat to democracy on their end. And so
the divergence was on who they believe was a threat to democracy.
Yes.
Because they both were presumably or arguably fighting for democracy. If the election had been stolen, that would have been antithetical to democracy, because it wasn't stolen. Yeah. According to Jeff, because it wasn't stolen. The January 6th committee and obviously the Capitol Police and everybody that was trying to resist, and protect the institutions that we had were fighting for democracy. We cannot let this mob destroy democracy.
Yes. Yeah.
So they were both they were both carrying the banner of democracy, rah rah rah. But then they were both saying the other was
exactly
democracy.
But that's the irony. It's like there's a lot of commonality there that is ignored because of nobody wants to really dive into the context, right? And everything's so political now. It's bipartisan. They're the enemy. We're right. You're wrong. Yeah. And so we don't have those conversations. But anyway, I thought it was interesting because it's some of those same things are playing even now, today, obviously, but in politics.
Yeah. And what is really interesting too, and it goes to your point, is Professor Gatti even touches touches on this in the book. He's saying that precisely when people talk about the Holocaust and these horrific events, they say we must make sure that this doesn't happen ever again.
Yeah.
And that's right. That absolutely, unequivocally, that should be the case. That should never happen again under any circumstances. But then one thing that he points out, and I think he has a good point, is what we don't talk about is how the systems that were in place and followed by the people that caused these and contributed to these horrific events are systems in place today.
Yeah.
That then create that exposure, that risk of, if not the same events, similar events happening and treating people in the same way that the Jewish community was treated during the Holocaust. And those same systems are in place, as evidenced by the bias of administrative evil. Because, at risk of oversimplifying it, that definitely was not it. This bias was very much at play during that time.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's following the orders, following instructions. I'm just a cog in the machine. And I was just literally following orders.
And I think, too, with that, context is huge because Hitler was adored by everybody in the country initially. And so it's not like he just jumped into killing Jews and rounding them up. There was a big lead up where he bought in. The citizens bought into him. They believed in him. They were like, oh, this is what we need. This is the leader we need. It's such a refreshing for the country. There's some similarities to what the U.S. is going through. But it was like, so they saw that. And then from there came the evil, I guess, right? But they had already bought that in. So it was much easier to kind of go along with all these other things without questioning them or without really thinking too much into it. And yeah, it's absolutely still happening now. Yeah. Because it's one thing to say, that'll never happen again. Just like, again, with the democracy and stuff, what we're dealing with now, I don't know how many times in the U.S. that would never happen in the U.S. Never. We look at all these other countries, judge all these other countries because they're democratic, but they're not. We know that. Yeah. They're fake elections, and it happens all the time. But here we are.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point, which actually is a great segue to the experiment that I want to talk about. And there's two experiments. We know they have been presented in many different sources. Obviously, Professor Gatti would be remiss if he did not include him in his book. So I'll talk about the first one, and then I'll let you talk about the second one. So I thought it was very interesting. If you want to know who and this is a cop-out, because I forgot to write down the name of the professor running the experiment.
Oh, yeah.
So if you want to know the name of the professor and the year, buy the book. Blind Injustice by Professor Mark Gatti, Chapter 2, last section, Administrative Evil.
And a spoiler alert, it was before we really had any ethical guidelines of running experiments.
And you'll know why, because as I go through the dynamics of the experiment, you realize that, and he says that, I think, in the book, you would not be able to run the same experiment today.
Yeah, yes, not even
because
close.
of the ethical boards and all these organizations that are designed to make sure that you are conducting tests in an ethical way. So, but anyways, this experiment involved three parties: scientists, and they were all actors, right? So there was a small team, which was the professor and the people that were helping him, assisting him with the experiment. Those were the real scientists, the ones running the experiment. But they had actors playing the role of scientists with a white coat, which to anybody who's been in a hospital or in a lab setting, having a white coat almost opens the door to anywhere, because it conveys a message of authority and in our minds says, oh, that person knows what they're talking about.
Yeah.
They are running the show. Why? Because we see them as doctors, scientists, whatever. So then we have the scientists. That's the first party that was part of this experiment. The second party were the quote-unquote learners. And these were paid actors who were supposed to be the subjects of the experiment. And I'll talk about what the purported experiment was and what the actual experiment was. But then you had also the third party, which was the teachers. And teachers were the real subjects of the experiment, the ones that the professor wanted to see if they would fall victim of the administrative evil bias. Yeah. So now that you know these three parties, let me tell you about the objective of the experiment. The professor said, kind of to what we were talking about earlier today, Americans, if they found themselves in a situation like Germans did in Hitler's era, Americans would not have gone through and committed all these horrific acts because again we hold ourselves to a higher standard. We're sitting atop this huge, super tall high horse. That's
right.
Right. So
American
the experiment was
exactly
America. Fuck yeah.
That's right.
So the experiment was supposed to prove that Americans would not do that. And how were they attempting to prove this? Well, they had all these teachers and these students. Well, the teachers, again, the real subjects of the experiment, were supposed to sit in this booth, right, where they would administer the test to the learners. They could not see the learners, they could just hear them. And the learners, who were the paid actors, were supposed to memorize pairs of words said by the teachers. So the teachers would say, hey, here's the first pair, blah, 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 second pair, so on and so forth. The learners would then repeat those pairs back. Inevitably, they would miss some pairs. And if that was the case, the teachers were instructed to press a button that would give the learners a shock, like an electric shock. And so what was this supposed to do? It was supposed to show in the teacher's mind that was encouragement for the learners to remember the pairs. The real experiment was, will these teachers be willing to increase the voltage, right, on the punishment if told to do so? And that's why I'm kind of going around trying to give you as much context as possible so that you know that the real experiment is, will these teachers, instructed by scientists, agree to shock someone else, inflict pain, quite literally, if told to do so?
You mean they lied?
Find out on the next part of this.
Part 4 of Blind Denial.
And the reason why it was interesting is because there's many reasons why it was interesting, but the voltage went from 45 volts all the way to 450 volts. And interestingly, they had the teachers sit down and experiment what a 45 volt shock felt like. And while it was not like life-threatening or anything, it was definitely enough to catch your attention. So then the teachers sat down ready to provide, to give the lesson to the learners. The learners were instructed to, they were told about the different levels of the voltage, and they were said to, if the voltage is this and this, you need to act this way, act like you're feeling a certain kind of pain. If it's between this and this, like medium, you need to scream and yell. If it is a certain point, you need to like just yell your lungs out, not even respond to questions. And if it is from like, let's say 350 to 450, you don't respond, almost as if you were dead or unconscious, right? So that obviously not just, and we need to clarify, the actual voltage, even though the teacher could up it as instructed by the scientists, the voltage did not change at all on the learner side, on the actors. So the actors wouldn't actually feel the pain. They would just be able to know that they're being inflicted the punishment, the shock. So this is what happens. The teachers sit down, start giving the pairs to the learners. The learners are repeating them. When they get it right, they say correct. When they get it wrong, they get a shock. Every time they would get it wrong, they would increase the voltage, right? On the teacher side, the learners would not feel any different. When a teacher would start showing those signs that we were hoping to prove that Americans would hesitate to inflict more pain and greater pain, the scientists would always have a response, and there were 4 responses. The first response was the scientist would just say, please continue. The teacher would, okay, continue. Given the pairs, if something was wrong, shock, up the voltage a little bit more. If they showed hesitation after that, they would have 3 responses from the scientist giving in this particular order. The first one was, the experiment requires you to continue. And people would do it. The second one was, it is absolutely essential that you continue. The third response would be, again, if they resisted, the third one would be, you have no other choice. You must go on.
Yeah, you must continue. Yeah.
Now, it was only after the scientist had given this third response, right, that was meant to convey that you had no choice and you must continue. You are part of this machine. You must continue. Only if someone then hesitated after that, then the experiment would end. But the results were that more than 60% of participants, meaning more than 60% of the teachers, went all the way up to 450, even though the actors, the learners, stopped responding after a certain voltage. So the teachers couldn't even get the answers, and they would still administer the shock because the other instruction was no response equals wrong response. So they went all the way. So more than half went all the way to 450. Now, so much for Americans, not going through with it. What's even worse, when you had more than one teacher in the room, and this goes a step forward or a step beyond improving the administrative evil bias. When you had more than one teacher, meaning groups of teachers, conducting the same experiment, 100% of them went all the way to 450. And that just comes to show, well, now there was that group mentality. Think about it as peer pressure, if you will. But that group mentality led to Americans, supposedly the pinnacle and the poster people for, morals. 100% of them conducting in a group took an inflicted punishment that was, as far as they were concerned, enough to either kill or make someone, leave someone unconscious.
Yeah. And the interesting part about that is the exit interviews, they confirmed that too. Like, numerous of them said, "Oh yeah, I thought they were dead, or I thought they could have been dead," but they were still doing it. Like, what? What are you talking about?
Exactly. Like, so you were confirming that you knew, or it's not something that was unknown to you, and you still went through it.
Exactly.
Why? Because you were told you have no choice. You must go on. So they replaced that individual moral compass where they were like, "I don't want to inflict more pain to this person." We're like, "Oh, I have no choice, I guess. I must go on," and then they actually did it.
Yeah, it's insane.
I've been talking too much, but the conclusion to this, which Professor Gatti also talks about in the book, is the goal was for this American scientist to conduct this experiment with Americans, and then take it and conduct it in Germany to try and demonstrate that Germans have like a more strict, they follow more strictly instructions.
There's something like inherently wrong with them, or
There's something like wrong that they're like just blind to structures of groups. But the experiment was so wrong, they're like, we're not even gonna bother. This is a flaw in human nature because 100% of people. That's all the percent.
It's terrifying, right?
It was really bad. I mean, I'm laughing, but only because it's just so ridiculous, right? It's not a good experiment, but it's a great experiment for the sake of understanding the concept.
Something else I want to bring up about that I thought was interesting, and I found out this through another book I was listening to. It's an audiobook, but it's called Talking to Strangers, and like a lot of these books, like Gottsi's, Blind Injustice, everything else, they want to talk about it because it's fascinating. He's looking at it for different reasons, but one thing they talked about was this should have been very obviously fake to people that were doing the experiment. And so at first there was kind of a concern of maybe that influenced them, or maybe that was because there's things that, like, why is the person who's supposed to be teaching this, right, the professor, in the room with the person running the experiment, not the person who's supposed to be the learner, right? And then the sounds were coming from the speaker that was in the other direction from where the individual was in the room. There was a bunch of things that like made them kind of question it, and some of them talked about that. They were like, I thought it was kind of weird, but they still believed it was actually happening. And if anything, that makes it was like, I don't know, it's interesting, but it's almost like worse because it's like There was things they should have, if nothing else, at least question.
Not only
like
are you,
kind of what's going on.
Not only are you victim to this disconnect with your own moral values, but it also, I guess, makes you have less common sense because you wouldn't question things that normally you would question. Not just inflicting pain on someone else, but it's like, wait, this doesn't seem right.
Yeah. But you're like, oh, whatever. Like, I guess things are normal. Like, right? And it just makes it even worse to an extent because it's that whole, like, I'm just following orders. Like, there's things I should ask about or kind of, like, inquire about, but whatever. Like, you know, and it's like, to me, I was like, but they believed it. You know, so there was a concern of maybe if they thought it wasn't real, obviously, they'd go along with orders. But no, they genuinely believed it. And some of them were actually shaken up because they thought that they potentially killed somebody. Yeah. Like, I've, visually shaken them. The other thing they brought up was the acting was so bad, right? Because they weren't really getting shocked. So they were just screaming. They were like, oh, I didn't believe it. But then the guy came out. Like, when they saw the person, like, he's like, I thought I killed him. Like, oh, and then I saw him in real life and just made me feel so much worse because I guess his acting in person was way better. Right. He's like, thank you for stopping when you did or whatever. I don't know. But it was just like, it's a fascinating, absolutely fascinating experiment, and obviously it's still talked about to this day for a reason. Yeah.
But there was one, which is the one we were talking about earlier about you couldn't replicate that experiment anymore because of the new testing standards that we have.
Yeah.
That's the Stanford experiment. So why don't you tell us about that one?
Yeah, Stanford prison experiment, and I believe they were all it was obviously a mock prison where they believe they were all college. I want to believe they were college students, but they're all volunteers. They were paid to kind of participate, or they got college credit. I can't remember. I think they were paid. I think they put a newspaper ad, actually. Yeah. But they were paid, and they were, they didn't know. They kind of knew what was going on to an extent, but not really. They all got brought in. They got divided into groups. They were either prison guards, like the COs, correction officers, or the prisoners in this situation. And I think they all thought it was kind of fun at first. Like, oh, this would be fun, and again, they were getting paid, and it was like, oh, this is cool. And I think it was... It's
like role playing,
Yeah. I think it was originally supposed to go...
For 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. Spoiler alert, it didn't last 2 weeks, but...
Well, the reason why it didn't last 2 weeks is interesting.
Exactly. So, yeah, they divide them into the groups, and at first... Again, I think everybody kind of thought it was, because it's a role play. It's a hypothetical. It's not, like, oh, this is fun. You don't really take it too serious. But as the experiment went on, that whole role identity and the administration, as far as changing your identity as an individual and, replacing that with you are now part of this kind of machine, right? That is the prison system. Absolutely started to take effect. And at first it was kind of, little like small things. And then it got significantly worse to where the guards were essentially torturing the prisoners, and then in this hypothetical, to the point where they weren't letting them use the restroom. They were defecating in buckets and keeping them in the cells. They were like screwing with their sleep. They were like all the stuff that you hear happen in, well, I'd say real prisons too, but like to some extent military prisons was happening here, right? And
talk about power tripping.
Yes, and that's exactly what it was. I think because they started in their head believing that whole. We are superior to you, and the dehumanization started playing in, even though they were all volunteers. They all came in together, right? None of them, it's not like they had a background. Like somebody was like, oh, this is ingrained in me. I was in law enforcement and whatever. Yeah. No, they all came in at the same time, and we're talking a matter of days. Yeah, this happened. That's what makes it so crazy. It wasn't some... conditioning over a period of time. I mean, a period of time, yes, a couple of days, but it wasn't like years and years in the making that slowly, the experiences changed these people. It happened that quick,
The interesting thing is, supposedly, the people that were selected for this, like I think it was like 18 people, 99 or something. That it was an even number, so they can split them equally. But the number of people that were selected, they were literally filtered to try and pick up neutral people. Yeah. Someone who would not be already conditioned to either have a position of power or a position of of being submissive, right? A submissive nature. And it's really to your point is the conditioning, whatever might have been, happened in a matter of 5-6 days.
Yes. And that's all it lasted.
Yeah.
Because it got so bad. And that was before, like now this wouldn't happen in general, right?
Yeah.
We wouldn't be able to do this ever. But the fact that we didn't have those safeguards in place and it got cut, it got cut when it did, tells you how bad and how quickly this was escalating.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just that it was continuing to go on. It was that it was escalating over a matter of days. It was getting significantly worse. They were buying into this. They were becoming indoctrined basically in the system or the administration that was now, this corrections kind of overarch. But yeah, I mean, in the prisoners that were the prisoners, they started to also identify as prisoners. Like they're not. They're college students or whatever.
They had given up on life. They were like dismissive, depressed.
Yes. So we're talking about
suffering anxiety,
potential PTSD, like significant psychological trauma
in 6 days.
Yes. Yeah.
And these are people who knew this was an experiment.
Exactly. They all knew.
Yeah. Imagine transpose this concept to real life, where you have people who are real prisoners and people who are real COs, right? Or police, or prosecutors. These people who knew it was an experiment were suffering the very real cognitive consequences of the programming that they were going through.
Yeah. And you are willing to, knowing that that you don't really have this role in real life, right? This is a hypo. Now, I think that's part of the issue is that the hypo starts to fade, right?
Yeah.
It becomes real life.
You start believing it.
But it's like, this is fake. This is a role play. And you are dehumanizing these people. You're treating people like this in a matter of days in a fake scenario. What would make you believe you wouldn't do this in real life in a real setting when you were actually in this role?
Dynamic.
Yes. Yeah. So, I think that's why it was so terrifying. It was how many people were willing to go along with it, and then the implications it had on both sides. Given it was fake, but it had very real implications on the prisoners who were actually suffering psychological, consequences from this that would have been similar if they were actually really in prison.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, you had these people who were your everyday people. You said that they were kind of, unbiased. They weren't kind of conditioned to kind of think this way or act this way. In a matter of days, they were able to become this monster that everybody says they would never be, right? Yeah. Or I would be the exception. And it's like, no. The problem is,
this proves that you're not.
Everybody wants to believe it, but the reality is, when that structure's in place, there's very few exceptions.
Yeah.
There obviously are. Even there was in Nazi Germany too. We had Operation Valkyrie. You had some people who went against Hitler, but it was like we're talking a couple percent, maybe.
The very, very real, and very rare exception to the rule.
Yeah, it's much easier just to go along with it. Things are the way they are. This is how things are done. And just kind of go along with it. And we're by nature we are tribal people. Like humans are tribal. We're group people. We like to be a part of a group, be accepted in a group. And if a group's telling us to do one thing or another,
I don't. I'm a leader of men.
It's the lone wolf.
No, I follow nobody's rules.
That's right. But by nature, you want to. So it's
when you want to belong.
Yeah.
And which is kind of where peer pressure comes in. Like I've joked about it being peer pressure, but it's a real craving that we have.
For sure.
Instinctually to be tribal, to be accepted within a group, to be within a tribe.
Yeah. And you want to please, right?
Which is also what multi-level marketing companies use to try and get you to be like, oh, join our tribe. You're our tribe.
For sure.
Bro, you're showing
part of our family.
Yeah,
whatever.
Like, get the fuck out.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. But looking at these two individually, but also together, it just shows you, like, not only are everyday people, taken off the street, normal people, willing to essentially torture people and treat them like animals and have no remorse for it, actually get joy out of it. A lot of these individuals, the prison guards, were getting joy out of what they were doing, which is even worse and more sadistic. But also, on the other end, they're even willing to potentially kill these people that they don't even know because someone told me I got to keep doing it. I got to keep doing it. They said I got to do it.
They said I have no choice.
Yeah.
So I got to do it.
Even though we know this is an experiment that you volunteered for, nobody's holding a gun to your head, right? You could leave at any time. You could terminate at any time. And they told them that at the beginning. But at some point during that process, they either they forgot that, or they no longer believed that. And they just went along with things, right? And so, yeah, it's terrifying.
It is. And
terrifying.
It's also what makes it so interesting because, again, it's something that exists today.
Yeah.
It's very much a real thing that exists today, and that, it's out there and that we're exposed to every single day in all systems, not only the judicial system, everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to close with a less sad story, but it was I can't remember the book, but I was listening to this audiobook, and they were talking about the experiment that I don't know if she was a kindergarten teacher or like an elementary. It was young children.
Yeah.
And the experiment was very similar to the Stanford prison experiment, because the teacher said, okay, it's been decided that all the children with, colored eyes, like blue and green and gray or hazel, whatever, are superior to those with dark colored eyes, black, brown, dark brown. And so throughout the course of a day, the professor was acting accordingly to this now decree, right? So the people with colored eyes, like light colored eyes, were being given priority, and they were given more time to go on recess, and they were given like treats and whatnot. The people that had like dark colored eyes would be sitting in the back. They were essentially told, if you have light colored eyes, you're superior.
Yeah.
Well, these children were acting it both sides, very much the way that the Stanford prisoner experiment was conducted. The prisoners were acting like prisoners.
Yeah.
The children that were told they were inferior were acting inferior, right? And I don't know if it's a day or a couple of days, but then the professor comes back and says, "Oops, I made a mistake. Turns out it was the other way. The people with dark colored eyes are the superior people, not the superior students. Yeah. The other ones
my bad.
My bad. Sorry." And then all of a sudden you see the dynamics shift like that. And then and you see now the kids with like light colored eyes be like all deflected and not wanting to eat, and the ones that were like sad and depressed before were wanting to now go on recess and have food and talk to their classmates. So it was to a very much a lower degree a similar experiment, and how that dynamic can change immediately.
Yeah.
And you as a young boy or girl, you can still identify the dynamics. Yeah. If you're told you're better or you're worse than someone, you will internalize it and you will act accordingly, which should tell us not only about the existence of the administrative evil bias, but also how children are susceptible, which everybody knows, to what you tell them and the way you treat them.
Yes.
They absorb everything like a sponge. So we should, as a side note, make sure that we talk to children in a way that is conscious of what we're telling them, because they will absorb it and they will internalize it.
And that's a big part of, obviously, the issues with gentrification and the inner city schools, and then them not having role models all the time, stuff like that. It's like, and a lot of them times their teachers tell them like, "Oh, you're an idiot" or whatever. It's like,
you don't know anything. You're never going to be. You're never going to amount to anything.
And that's what is that setting them up for? And it's like, so the system continues, and it's like, no, I think it's big for this in the sense that it shows it's not just adults that buy into this almost immediately. I think they were scoring. It was either that experiment or another similar one where they were actually taking tests at some point and they were doing worse on them too.
Right.
And it was
they were,
because they were told they were
you're
dumb.
Smarter. So then you would get better grades, and then you wouldn't even try because you're told you're dumber.
Yes.
And then when you switch, turns out you have like all this energy, and this creativity, and now you want to learn because you have the motivation to do it.
And it shows you what encouragement can do, a positive encouragement. I guess the flip side of that is also, you get the whole like, everybody gets a ribbon or participation trophy, and obviously that's overcorrection. But like, it's in my opinion at least. But
I agree.
There's definitely benefits to that, right? And kids more than anybody are susceptible at an early age. But it's fascinating, and like you said, that implication just shows that when you see this with police departments, with prosecutors' offices, judges, whatever the case may be, and then the criminal justice system, it's certainly more than just the criminal justice system, but This is not, what we see there, and we think is terrible. It is terrible, but like, you see what your normal everyday people are able to do, potentially thinking they killed people. Was no better than Nazi Germany, to be honest with you. At that point, you were told by somebody to do something, knowing or thinking or believing that, oh yeah, they're probably going to die, but they told me I got to do it. Yes, or if nothing else, suffer significantly because they weren't learning how to do whatever this BS test they were doing was. And so, yeah, your everyday person, you in the right context, you very well could be the Nazi. As bad as that sounds.
That is what a way to summarize today's episode.
You're all Nazis. No.
Given the right circumstances, you could be the Nazi.
I mean,
I don't know. Are we even going to be able to upload this to YouTube?
We're going to cancel. That's kind of the takeaway, though. I mean, if you think about it.
It is.
Not me, though. I would be the exception.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. And so would I. Lone wolves.
That's right.
Yeah. But no, and the summary, without calling anybody a Nazi, is that when you are cogs in the machine, it is very real and it is very possible that you will abandon your moral compass, as good as it may be, for what you believe to be, as part of a group mentality, the greater good.
Yeah.
Right? So and because, again, Nazi Germany, the Germans might have been told, again, the Jewish community, the Jewish people are the enemy. Yeah. They are the ones that are going to destroy our country. In the experiment that happened with the teachers and the learners, you have no choice. Yeah. You have to punish them. You have to. And they're not responding. That means they have to zap them with more and more voltage.
You don't have a guy with holding a gun to your head saying, "Hey, you got to keep going." Yeah. You got a guy in a lab coat. The experiment
in Nazi Germany,
must
you might have held a gun. This is not justifying by any means.
But I'm saying that's why it's so bad here.
Yeah.
You don't have any of that, right? Like, you could have left at any point. You could have said, "No, you know what, man? I'm not cool with this. I'm leaving." Like, and that should have happened way before the point where you thought they died.
Exactly. Yeah.
And quite frankly,
and in all fairness, at least when the teachers were by themselves, 40% of it, or a little bit less than 40% of them said, "Fuck this.
Yeah.
We're not going to do this." Yeah. Right? But still more than 60% continued. And then when you put them in pairs or in groups, everyone did it. All of them, 100%. Do you know how hard it is in the scientific world when you have experiments to get 100% results of anything?
Yeah.
Think about that.
And 60 is a large majority. That is not like 51.
No, it's a significant, because it's over 60%. So not even just 60. Over 60%.
That's terrifying.
Which and could be 61, but anyways, it's still. That is significant. But it's really hard in any area, in any field of science that conducts hypotheses and experiments. Yeah. It's almost impossible to get experiments that yield a result of 100%, and this one did. Yeah,
I think the takeaway here is, if you don't want to be a Nazi, no, but seriously, I think awareness is key. We know everybody is capable of doing these kind of things. You are not the exception. So knowing that you are capable of doing this, knowing that this can happen in make-believe scenarios that only last a couple of days or maybe a couple of hours, right? Yeah. Just keep that in mind when you go into whatever your role is, that the group might do something and you need to be aware that just because you're working for somebody or you're in a certain role, whatever that role may be, you still have free will.
Yeah. It's not mean you have to do everything they tell you to do.
You still are the individual.
Yeah. And again, this is not to say, if your employer says you got to do this, I don't have to do it because I'm my own person. I mean, if you want to, go ahead.
Law has told me I don't.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, go ahead. But we're talking about these extreme cases where whatever you're being asked to do goes against your own values and your own morals. Know that the reason why you might feel compelled to go with it is because there's a bias that exists that is very much real and that may be acting upon you for you to do this. Yeah. But once, to your point, Jeff, about being aware of it, once you put a name to it, you deprive this bias of much of its power. Mm-hmm. Now, it doesn't go away, but at least knowing about it and understanding it will help you identify and be like, oh, I don't want to fall victim to it this time around.
And I think that's kind of why I brought up the insurrection thing. Is because it's so easy to be like, they're idiots, they're criminals, they need to be tried with treason, whatever. And a lot of them probably should, right? But we don't make progress approaching it like that. I'm not saying they shouldn't be tried. They shouldn't be prosecuted. People who stormed the Capitol absolutely should. But the people who believe that, who supported that, you're not going to get anywhere by just saying, because they believed it. They literally believed it. The issue is changing that belief, with the basis of that belief. That is the problem. Not the people who thought they were being patriots because they bought into this false narrative.
Yeah.
Because our hearts and minds were aligned the same way we were, or on the other side, Yeah. The issue is the information they were getting was wrong. Oh, I don't care. Well, I don't support the insurrection. I don't give a shit. I don't. But it's like, that's the point, though. It's like
Jeff's views do not. No, I'm kidding.
You need to just be aware of it. Be aware that this is coming to anybody, and try the best you can to keep that in your mind and keep your values at the forefront.
Yeah.
And
wear your morals on your sleeve.
Yeah.
Now, one thing.
And challenge it if you see other people doing it.
Exactly.
I mean,
a caveat, because it works both ways. If you see other people doing something they shouldn't do, and you're able to change one person, a very small number of people might be able to then turn the tide.
Exactly.
Which is good, right?
Maybe change the administration
by... And then the good, right? The people that are like resisting this wrong act may be able to then turn the tide and then get everyone else to not do the bad. Right, and I'm talking very like general terms, but a caveat to what you said about people really believing it. Believing something doesn't make it not a crime.
Yeah, exactly.
and those of you that follow us on TikTok know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Just FYI.
Well, it depends on the mens rea. I guess technically it could be.
Well, this is true. This is true. So we could go a lot deeper, right?
Yeah,
because there are certain crimes that require mens rea, and that just means a state of mind that that intends to commit the crime. But in all fairness, mens rea does not mean I intend to commit a crime. Is I intend to do an action that happens to be a crime. Mm-hmm. So even then, that doesn't. It's not a free for all.
No, and it certainly depends on the specific crime.
It depends on the crime, because then that will tell you what the mens rea required to commit the crime is.
And to be clear, the insurrection is not one of those.
Yeah.
The trying to overthrow the certification of votes and storming the Capitol, doesn't matter what your beliefs were, that is not.
Hell, trespassing as a simple crime doesn't require much of a mens rea. It just requires you to be there knowing that you shouldn't be there.
Quite frankly, even if the election was stolen, if that were true, and the votes were fraudulent, but Congress was still certifying those votes, you would still be in breach of the law, the U.S. law, by storming the Capitol and doing what happened. So regardless, it doesn't make it okay.
Yeah.
But
shameless plug. Follow us on TikTok. There's very interesting conversations going on there right now.
Oh yeah.
I will include the username somewhere here, and it's gonna be the link is gonna be in the description too. But anyways, we hope you enjoyed today's topic. Jeff, do you have any parting words? Anything else you want to say?
Remember, just don't be a Nazi.
That is always a great rule of thumb to live by.
Also, YouTube, don't take this down, please.
Yes, please. Yeah, hopefully. I don't know if I'm gonna have to like censor every time we said the word because
don't cancel us.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll find out soon enough. But anyways, thank you for watching. Let us know in the comments below what your thoughts are. Share with your friends. We'll see you next time
on part 4 of Blind Denial.
That is not going to be a part 4. Next time we're going to talk about chapter 3 of the book.
Yeah.
Again, if you want to follow along with what we're talking about, if you want to be a part of the conversation, you're more than welcome. The link to the book Blind Injustice by Professor Mark Gotts is going to be in the description. And just so you know, the link is just the one link, but once you go into the link, and it's an Amazon link, you'll see the option to do like an ebook or like the Kindle version, the audiobook, or the physical book that we have. So link is going to be there. Check it out. Even if you don't want to follow along with these, because you don't want to wait, every week to go over the chapters, it's a great read. It's very interesting, and that just brings you a way of thinking that is different, and that it gives you a different perspective and a different way of framing certain things that you might have experienced yourself.
It's definitely a good addition to this, because we don't cover everything that's covered in any given chapter, like directly, verbatim or anything like that. But we also bring in our own experiences, different viewpoints and stuff that's not covered in the book. So doing both is ideal if
Yeah.
you have the time.
Yeah.
It certainly would add more value to what you get out of the podcast, and vice versa.
Yeah,
I
and then
think,
and then you can then contribute to the conversation
Yeah.
that we're having, which I think is the whole point.
Yeah.
Getting the value out of it as much as you are, whether you're driving and listening to us on Spotify or watching things on YouTube. Just being able to then participate in the conversation, knowing what we're talking about. I think that just adds value to the whole thing. So, thank you again for sticking with us today. This was Lawish.